What's up, everybody? I have another controller shootout. As you can see, we have a bunch of SNES controllers here. First off, let's go through each one. We're looking at the Retrobit Dual Link SNES controller. This is the Street Fighter version, as you can see. We are looking at the Hyperkin Scout. We are looking at the Retrobit Super Retro SNES controller. Two variants of that. And then briefly, we're going to go over these 8bitdo controllers. This is the SFC30. The SN30 Pro, and the SN30 Pro Plus. Let's go over the packaging here. Here is the Hyperkin Scout packaging. Not too bad, displayed quite nice. So here's like a 360 view. There's the top, right, bottom. Pretty basic stuff. 10-foot cable, very nice. Oh, shit. Here's the side of that. Here's the back. Pretty basic stuff. But yeah, looks kind of fancy though if you put it on display. And here's the actual stock image if you want to see that with a controller inside of it. Next up, we have the Retrobit Dual Link box. Here's the side. This has a 6-foot cable, which I think kind of sucks. But it's not the worst. As you can see, the eBay seller doesn't know how to package anything right there. That's the side of that. Okay. And I don't have the actual boxes for the rest of these controllers out because, frankly, it's too damn cold for me to go into storage. But here are some stock images of those. Okay, so let's start out with the Hyperkin controllers. So here is the Scout. You might be wondering, why do I have two of these? Well, there is a 50-50 chance you're going to get a defective unit with Hyperkin products. I've experienced this now with both the SNES controllers and the Genesis controllers. You can see my video in the description if you want to see what I'm talking about the Hyperkin controllers with the Genesis. But with this one in particular, so first off, here's the defective one. As you can see, there are air bubbles all over the place, and I couldn't simply just push them out because there were just too many of them. The buttons, the face buttons kind of feel off. Like they work, but they're just a little too, I don't know how to describe it. They're a little stiff and they're just a little too bumpy, I guess you could say. But they work. The start and select buttons, these are okay. The shoulder buttons are alright. The D-pad, however, is terrible. Like, you may as well just chuck this thing in the trash. You have to bear down for this thing to respond. I don't know why. It barely pivots, even though it's slightly raised, as you can see. It barely has a pivot to it. And even then, I mean, it's not responsive. It also feels extremely mushy. So yeah, this was not a good experience here. Now, going to the one that works, as you can see, there's a couple air bubbles, but it's not so bad now. There's only this one because that's how the plastic underneath is molded. This is a textured decal here, kind of like what you would see on a NES controller. These buttons are much more springy. Okay. Not bad at all. Shoulder buttons are good. The start and select on this one are a little mushy, but they work fine. Had no problems. The D-pad is raised a little more, I believe. And even though it doesn't pivot as much, it doesn't have as good of a central pivot, it's actually still pretty decent for fighting games. I had no problems doing quarter circle moves, charge moves, whatever. And it's plenty responsive, so that's good. 10-foot cable, which I love. Alright, here is the top here. The sides, you can see the thickness here. A little bit more beefy than a normal SNES controller, and you have these butt cheeks on the back that contour to your hand, which makes it very, very comfortable. I really like this controller when it works. Just if you want to buy one of these, get it local, don't get it online. Number one, these things are between $10 and $15. I got mine for $10, and for the price, would you rather go through the trouble of packing it, shipping it at your expense, and then driving it to the post office, or just buy another one? Or, you know, simply go to the store, exchange it. Other than that, though, this is a good controller. Connector's good quality. Not too tight, not too loose. Pretty much just right. The cable also feels rock solid. So, I really dig this controller as long as you get a good one. Next up, we have the Retrobit Dual Link SNES controller. So for this one, this is pretty much about the same thickness as a real SNES controller. What's different about it, obviously, besides the looks, is this D-pad is superior to a real SNES controller. You see it's raised a little bit more. It has a very nice central pivot. Doing like Hadokens, things like that, pretty much effortless with this thing. It just feels right. The shoulder buttons here are actually kind of mechanical feeling. They're pretty clicky, but not in a bad way. Face buttons, you got your convex here, concave here, just like a normal SNES controller. Very responsive, very springy. Okay. So yeah, here's the close-up of this. Sides, not bad. And then the dual link portion is this. As you can see, USB, SNES. Connectors are very high quality, the cable is too. Once again, not too loose, not too tight, just right. You don't have to worry about it feeling like it's going to rip your console port apart. So, very good there. Now for the cons of this controller. Number one, even though this has a pretty textured finish, which feels nice, the plastic itself feels a little bit brittle. I'm not worried about anything happening to it per se, but let's say you have kids, somebody throws something, it might break. So if you're an adult though, I mean, it's not a big deal. It feels a little bit light, it could be a touch heavier, but again, not a big deal. Another thing is, with these shoulder buttons, when you press this down, it's hard to see in this frame here, but there's a kind of a sharp edge right here. It's not going to cut you or anything, but it's just kind of annoying. I may actually sand that little edge down a little bit later just to make it smoother. So yeah, I've had this for a little while now, and I've experienced zero problems with it. Oh, and last con to this. This is only a 6-foot cable. Like I said before, I wish it were a 10-foot cable, but whatever. Next up, we have the Retrobit Super Retro controller. You can find these are a dime a dozen. You can find these everywhere, and they go from as little as $4 to like maybe $10 to $15. I've seen packs from $15 to $20 if you got 2 of these. So first off, this is a older iteration. This is a, I believe I got this in 2012, 2013, and it's actually pretty good. I like it more than the original SNES controller. I'm actually not that big a fan of the original, but anyway. So you have your convex, concave over here. Very responsive, very nice shoulder buttons here. Feel very nice and natural. The D-pad actually has kind of a worn-in feel, even when I first got it. And here's the raise on that. As you can see, it's got that curvature to it. So here's the bottom, here's the side, here's the top, and as you can see, it's contoured again. It's got your butt cheeks on the back to hold on to. This is an extremely comfortable controller. I really like it. I like the multicolored stuff, and it kind of reminds me of like a cross between a SNES and a Saturn pad, which is kind of neat. This is a more recent iteration of it, or variant, whatever. This came with the Super Retro 3 Plus. I've also seen it come with a lot of their other plug-and-play systems, like the Retrocade, I believe it's called. And same sort of deal, but I actually like the D-pad even better on this. It's just got more of a pivot to it. Very good for fighting games. Once again, extremely responsive buttons, and I kind of like the look of it, especially because it matches the Retro Trio console. Once again, you got your butt cheeks. And I feel like the plastic feels ever so slightly more sturdy on this one than the old one. So they improved on it a bit. Once again, about the same price. You can get it anywhere from like $5 to $20. If you pay $20 for this, though, you're overpaying. But for an extremely cheap controller, this is very nice. It's much better than, say, those no-name China-made controllers that you find for like $2 on eBay or whatever. No complaints here. So, good controller here. As far as cons go, really, there isn't much. I can't really think of anything. The connector's nice. Yeah. Getting into the 8bitdo stuff, these are not dedicated SNES controllers. As you can see, these are Bluetooth. However, I wanted to put these in the video because, number one, this one in particular, the SFC30, it went for $34.99. Unfortunately, it's discontinued. This is pretty much identical to a Super Famicom controller or a SNES controller. Same thickness just about, same shape, same feel, same everything except it's wireless. Okay, this is extremely nice. I prefer this over the SNES D-pad once again because it has a much better pivot to it. So good for fighting games, shooters, things like that once again. So Hadokens, whatever, very good. Springy buttons, these feel exactly like the real thing. Same with these, okay? Now, the only drawback to this, if you are planning on using this on an actual SNES, you're going to have to shell out $24.99 because you have to get that Bluetooth receiver for the SNES. So $34.99 plus $24.99, you're going to pay for it if you want something like this. Unless you're using a Raspberry Pi, computer, whatever, then it doesn't really matter. But yeah, if you're using it on the SNES, there's better options for the money. Same exact thing with this, same idea. You can use this on the Switch or really any Bluetooth device pretty much. As you can see, you got your analog sticks. I actually like these better than the Switch Pro Controller. And this iteration is styled after the DMG Game Boy, so you can see the purple buttons, they're all convex. The D-pad even is the same. You see that texture, it's just like the DMG. Very cool controller, feels great, performs great. There's your R1, R2, L1, L2. Okay, there's your little pairing button. So here's the top of that, the side, the bottom. And it's a bit beefier than a normal SNES controller, as you can see. But not bad. I really like it. It's extremely comfortable. Yeah, I have no complaints on this. And this goes for $44.99. Last but not least, the SN30 Pro Plus. This goes for $49.99. Very nice controller. It's far superior to the Switch Pro controller in my opinion. The analog sticks feel better. The location of them, both the buttons and the sticks, I think feel better. The triggers are better. These are analog, as you can see. Okay, and the way this molds to your hand is just more comfortable regardless of your hand size. The buttons, once again, very nice and springy. Feel just about like a real SNES controller. Alright, no issues with the start and select. You also have L3 and R3, both this one and the SN30. D-pad's great too. Once again, good for shooters, good for fighting games. Here is the front here. Okay. So let's start with the defective Hyperkin controller here. So here is how it connects. I don't have a real SNES unfortunately, but here's the Super Retro Trio. Plugging it in here. Nice and tight. If you want to pull it out, it doesn't give you too much resistance, as you can see. Next up, we have the good Hyperkin controller. Connector's pretty much the same. This one's actually slightly tighter. Plug it in. Alright, take it out. Gotta wiggle it a little bit, but not bad. It's not going to pull anything apart. Alright, and now the gameplay. Alright, now I'm starting with the defective unit here. Oh shit, my button mapping's all weird. As you can see, I can't throw a Hadouken to save my life. Same with a tornado kick. Struggling to really do much of anything. You have to, and that's when I really put some pressure on it. The face buttons are okay, as you can see. But Hadoukens, I mean, I'm barely doing it. Trying to do the tornado kick. I'm only doing it like once every 5 or 6 times. So that is the defective one. Alright, so here's Redkin using the good one. No problems. Now this D-pad doesn't have as much of a pivot, so you know I might misfire or whatever. But it's not like that defective one. As you can see, I'm not missing really anything. Yeah, no brainer there. So, once again, get this locally if you want one of these. Good controller as long as it works. Next up, the retro bit. Connector here. See how this goes. Not as tight as the Hyperkin, but still very firm. About the same amount of resistance when you pull it out. The newer version of the Super Retro pad. This came with a system here. And this actually, now that I'm looking at it, it's a little cheaper feeling than the other ones, but it works. And here's how it connects. Barely any resistance, so this may come out after you use it a few times. Alright, so let's start with a Street Fighter controller. Now for this, there's pretty much no effort with these quarter circle type moves. No effort really with the diagonal stuff, as you can see. I'm having no trouble whatsoever. Buttons are very springy. Despite it being one of those dual link controllers, you can see not really having any sort of lag. Yeah, great controller. Round 2 is going to be with the Super Retro, the newer variant. Now this D-pad's a little more stiff than the other, but as you can see, not really having any problem with this either. Bumpers are good. No issues with diagonals at all. It's a little bit more stiff, but it still works fine. Alright, so Bluekin over here. It's responsive. No issues with diagonals. Throw a few Hadokens. Oops. If you see me screw up, that's my fault, not the controllers. Tornado kick. Yeah. Not bad. Now let's do the Super Retro. Pretty consistent too. Can't complain there. My button mapping's kind of weird, the reason why I'm screwing up, because it's a Genesis game playing with a SNES controller. But anyway, so yeah, no complaints with either one of these. I slightly prefer the Street Fighter one just because the D-pad feels just a little bit better and more accurate. Alright, here is the older Super Retro by RetroBit. Connector here. Let's see how it connects. Actually pretty loose, but still easy to get in there. I don't feel like it's going to come out on accident. It pulls out pretty easy. Alright, so now let's compare the older Super Retro to the newer one. I'm going to start with the older one since you've already seen the newer one. It takes a little more effort with the older ones to do moves. I have a few misfires. So far I'm okay though. Not too bad. It's okay, but the newer one's just a little nicer. Okay. Comparing it to the newer one. About out of time. As you can see, first try. First try. Alright, so here's the older one. Throw some Hadokens. Oops. See, I'm not hitting it every time. Takes a little more effort, you can really tell in this game. You have to press down just a little bit harder. Alright. You can do it, as you can see. It's just a little more effort. And now for the newer one. Hadokens, first try. You can see I'm throwing them over and over. No problem. Tornado kicks. First try. So yeah. This one's just a little nicer. And this is with the SN30 Pro. I'm not going to go too much into detail because it's not a standard SNES pad, but it's just me playing against the computer. I'm getting my ass whooped, but you can see the turbo kicks are okay. So here is the SFC30 Pro controller, or I'm sorry, the SFC controller. This is about the closest you're going to get to the real thing without actually buying the real thing. Alright, so here's some quarter circles. No trouble, even on the left bumper here. Tornado kick, if I can do it. There you go. No issues. And finally, the SN30 Pro Plus. Do your Hadokens. No effort involved. I think out of all the D-pads, of all these controllers I've shown, this one has the best out of all of them. RetroBit comes close, but this one's just better. Watch me get my ass kicked. Alright, so let's wrap this up here. Which should you get, you say? Well, if you want to go all out, get the fanciest thing possible, of course you can go with one of the 8bitdos. The plastic on these feel exactly like real SNES controllers. They're super durable. I mean, you could chuck this at a wall and it'll still work. This molds to your hand perfectly. This is probably the most comfortable controller to hold that I've ever had. The D-pad's great. These are great right here. These feel, I think this is better than a real Switch Pro controller. On the other hand, you have to use some kind of adapter, which costs a lot, in addition to the $50 you already have to pay for this, or this, and yeah. So you're going to pay for that. But, of course, you could use it on several different devices. Now, if you want as close as possible to the SNES pad, of course, get one of these. These in particular are discontinued, but they do have new versions, but I haven't tried them. Now, as far as something, if you don't care for wireless functionality or multi-system functionality, whatever, you want something that just works, any of these really is viable here. Personally, for me, this is the weakest link, only because, as you saw, it takes a little bit more effort to pull off quarter circle moves and stuff. You can do it, and the controller is built pretty nice. It's just it takes more effort. The D-pad's a little more shallow. It's kind of hard to tell in this video, and it just doesn't pivot as well. Now this is a very good controller. I still like it. The D-pad's raised. It pivots better than the old version. It looks cool, feels good. The only problem is, number one, it has a 6-foot cable. Number two, this controller connector right here, it just has a little too much give to it. I feel like if you were to trip or something, or have somebody trip, it'll just yank it right out of the system. That aside, though, still a pretty decent controller. They're dirt cheap. You can get two of them for like $15, so good value there. Now, between these two, if you could take the ergonomics of this controller, the cable length, but then take this controller and put the internals in it, you'd pretty much have a 10 out of 10 for me. None of these are perfect, but overall, if I were to pick just one out of all these for playing Super Nintendo, it's this one. The D-pad feels perfect. It is incredibly responsive. The pivot is great. Just like, I mean, it's better than a real SNES controller. I love the clicky buttons on the top. No problems there. And the buttons, the face buttons, feel like a real SNES controller. The shape, the thickness, everything feels like a real SNES controller. The plastic's a little cheaper, but other than that, I mean, this is, out of all these, I think this is the best by far, and it's still not that expensive, less than $20. And even though it's a 6-foot cable, you get both USB and SNES, so you can play it on multiple systems. And if you wanted to play something like a regular SNES controller on PC, Raspberry Pi, whatever, just get one of these. Okay, these are dirt cheap. So yeah, I hope that does it for you. Hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, horns up.